Excellent. Fantastic. Let me get rid of the background. There we go. Great, great, great. Well, it is always, I say this every year, it is always so hard to follow Rita and Lala. It is, but it's so grounding to have that sense of purpose and the goal so clearly in mind and so beautifully articulated. So as Liz mentioned, I'm Gaby. I'm one of our co-founders, and I'm currently our political director. And before I kick off our strategy session, I do just want to thank again my brilliant co-founders, Lala, Rita, and Liz, all of our incredible, fantastic staff for the very heroic work that they have done putting this summit together. This is our fourth summit, our first virtual summit, and I hope everyone agrees that it's off to an incredible start. I also just want to thank Rita and Lala for those opening remarks, which I think really frame so incredibly well the vision and the purpose and the spirit of this organization. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to build this organization alongside all three of you. And I'm so grateful to Rita for her extraordinary leadership, and excited for Lala to be stepping into this role, and just so energized for the road ahead with this organization as we head into the new year with the wind in our sails here from Washington, D.C., and into this new cycle. So let's talk about the road ahead. I'm going to share my screen. And actually, for some reason, that is not working. That's a bummer. Not sure, but maybe I can just send my deck into our Slack, and maybe someone else could help me out, or I can just get started. Yes, Liz will help out. Thank you. So I'll just wait 1 second to see if we can get the deck up. But while we work on that, I'll just give a little preview of kind of, what we're thinking for this talk today. I want to just talk about a few things. First, we'll talk about our 21-22 strategy, which we released a few weeks ago. And so this will include just a very quick bit about the mission of our organization, why we focus exclusively on state legislatures, and how we accomplish that mission. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. That's exactly where we want to be. Then we'll take a deep dive into the electoral strategy. So our general electoral strategy, a look back briefly at some of the successes we've had with that strategy over the past 4 years, and then a look ahead to this year and next year. And then we should have some time for Q&A. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go along, but also especially as we near the end of the presentation. And so I'll try to look through and answer based on the time that's available. Might not get to your questions. Please feel free to email me or direct message me if you have additional questions. And as a heads up, I'll be holding a breakout session tomorrow with our amazing Associate Director of Research, Mallory Roman, to discuss our research agenda and the 2020 election results and analysis, if that's of interest. So the next slide, if we could advance. So let's see. Oh, and one more. There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much for the assist on this. So yes, so let's dive in. So, I think Rita and Lala so beautifully framed the mission of this organization. It is, to exclusively build progressive power in state legislatures. That is our mission. As many of you know, so many familiar names on this session today. We started the organization in late 2016 because we saw a gap in organizing capacity and resources going specifically to Dems running for state legislature, who we saw were being routinely outspent by wide margins, and whose races generally didn't get the headlines, right? Didn't get the attention and the resources. I like to say, well, I hate to say, that Democrats are tardy to the party when it comes to focusing on state legislatures. Republicans have been at this game for decades, weaponizing state legislatures for their own regressive policy goals. One way to think about it is ALEC, which is one of the premier institutions on the right, started in 1973. And so, it's a great reminder. We always have to remember the history and put our work into context. We are tardy to the party, but we're here now. But that's exactly it. We came to understand so quickly, and so just as so many of you understand it now, that state legislatures are such an important overlooked venue of power for progressives. This is our policy pipeline. Rita and Lala shared some incredible examples of progressive policy that is being incubated in our now democratic trifecta states, as well as some of the regressive policy, right, that Republicans are always looking to continue to infect like a virus between states. But state legislatures are our leadership pipeline. Half of all presidents started in their state legislature. Half of all members of Congress started in their state legislatures. Of course, state leg is a vital key to voting rights. And gerrymandering is a flavor of that. Voter suppression is a flavor of that. Voting rights are primarily state rights. They come from state laws and state policies. And finally, we saw that focusing on state legislative races would yield a very high return on investment for our volunteer time and dollar. And I hope that you all feel that way as well, having worked on so many races with us. The impact that we can have at this level of the ballot is so high. So next slide. So how do we do it? We do it by filling critical gaps at every point in the political life cycle. And you heard a little bit from Lala about the 4 pillars of our strategy. And so we'll walk through each of those just a little bit in turn and talk a little bit more about them. But they are to win elections, to support organizers, to develop legislators and the pipeline, and to educate and empower. Next slide. So the first pillar is win elections, right? This is core to what we do and how we do it. First, we have our sophisticated data and analytics. I'm looking at Dr. Mallory Roman, who is an incredible asset to the team. We use data to inform the process of determining what the most strategic and competitive races are. We activate the incredibly powerful grassroots field and fundraising operations that you all are, you are the gas that makes the car go to support our candidates and help them succeed. And finally, we have a comprehensive candidate services program that we've grown over the years. When we first started this organization, we didn't have this program. We were just here to provide the field and fundraising support that we were able to offer. Over time, we came to see that we could offer candidates more. So we have our head of campaigns, Kira Hall. She'll be running an incredible panel with some former campaign managers of ours later in the summit, and our staff in the political department that is available to our candidates and their staff members for all kinds of professional support. So those are some of the ways in which we fulfill this purpose and mission of winning elections. Next slide. So the second pillar is we support organizers. And of course, we do this through the incredible work of our organizing department. You know that, of course, Lala has been our director in that department. And, there's a very incredible staff, all of whom are on this call. Neil Morgan, I'm sure that you all know, our head of organizing. There is an entire infrastructure in place that we have built to train and develop and build the community of all of you all. over 150 active teams and affiliates now, 50,000 members. So this has really grown into a tremendous operation to support you all. There's the Organizing Fellows program for young folks who want to learn the skills of being an organizer. We have our annual summit, and thank you all for being here. And I'm particularly excited about one new program that falls into this pillar, which is our new State Bridges program. This is really a program that will give our volunteers and our teams across the country the opportunity to connect with and to fundraise for organizations that are doing year-round power building work in the states where we'll be working. So we know that long-term community-based organizing, often led by people of color, is bedrock to our ability to build progressive power in states. And so this program will be a really great complement to the electoral work that we do too, kind of both sides of the coin. And so we're currently working with some partners to identify the organizations that will be in our 21-22 cohort for State Bridges, and we plan to launch sometime in March. Next slide. So the third pillar is our commitment and growing commitment to develop legislators and the pipeline. So first, our legislators. Now we have just about 50 alums who were sister district endorsed, who are now sitting state legislators. And we finally have a critical mass to really provide them with some innovative and additive programming. So this is in the form of our alumni program, as well as the Purple District Network. These are all of our folks share lots of things in common. One of the things that binds them all is that they've all flipped seats red to blue or are in very marginal districts. So they have a lot of experiences and resources to share amongst themselves and to learn and be in community with one another. So we've got a really great cohort model that is able to provide networking opportunities, leadership development, and all of those sorts of opportunities to connect and really learn from each other. So that's one program that I'm very excited about, and something that I'll be working on quite a bit this year. And then looking at the pipeline, what we mean by pipeline is the folks who are coming up to run. And a lot of the time, those are folks who may have run before and came up a little short. So I'm also really excited about our new Future Winners program, which is again going to use a cohort model to provide a group of exceptional former candidates from purple districts with those skills and resources and community that they need to run again and win. And I'm very excited to be working in partnership with some of our closest allies in the ecosystem, and we're planning to launch that program in March. Next slide. So the fourth pillar of the strategy is to educate and empower. So as I think many of you know, we have a robust research program here at Sister District, and I hope you'll consider coming to our research update tomorrow, as well as a breakout session tomorrow afternoon that Mallory and I will be running. And of course, we have our book club and fireside chat series as well. And then I think it's really important, and I think I saw some comments in the chat about this earlier. We are working tirelessly in our communications department, organizing department, political department, all across the organization to produce and disseminate thought leadership, educational materials and resources, and other content related to the importance of state legislatures and state policy, and tell the accomplishments of our alumni, so that we can really make the case publicly to our friends, our families, and everyone else that this is incredibly important work. And it's a long game, right? And our strategy requires multiple prongs to achieve the mission. And I think we really need to think about this work in terms of decades, as Republicans do, rather than individual years or individual election cycles. And so educating the public and ourselves about the importance of states and state policy is a really important part of this long-term strategic process. So next slide. Great. So, and next slide. So now we will take a deep dive. Now that we've gone through, just to walk through a little bit more detail about the 4 pillars of the strategy, let's take a deeper dive into that first one, which is winning elections. So an important piece here, of course, is the electoral strategy. Which states, which chambers, when, and why. So I think first at the top, it's important to keep in mind that the landscape may change a little bit between now and particularly next year. So the target states that we've identified, that list may change here or there. We may add a state or take one off depending on how things go. But we're in a good position to have a general bird's eye view of the electoral landscape for the next couple of years and to share the principles with you all that we'll be using in making more final decisions about states and chambers and seats. So in general, this approach should be familiar to folks who have been with us for a while. There are 99 state legislative chambers across the country and thousands of seats. So how do we prioritize and filter down? So the first cut is to look at the chamber level and see which chambers are strategically valuable in any given year. And so we're always looking for 3 types of chambers. We're looking for blue flips, where Dems are down just a few seats and where we think we can flip in one cycle. We're looking for blue holds, where Dems have a fragile majority, which we have to hold on to and defend and expand. And then we're looking for blue inroads, and or if you like, no chamber left behind. These are chambers where we're unlikely to have a one cycle solution to flip the chamber, but we have to put our marker down. We have to build power and think again in those longer term periods of time, not just year to year, but in decades. And so that's the general approach. Next slide. So in any given year, the actual mix of chambers and seats will change. And that's going to depend on a few factors. So the schedule of state elections differs year to year, right? For instance, in odd years, we don't have off years in state leg, but odd years, not too many states are holding elections, right? So that'll shift year to year. The composition of chambers shifts after each election. And I think really importantly, the urgency of other key races and broader electoral opportunities changes year to year, right? So given the volume of races, we can't endorse candidates in every state holding elections. What we try to do is prioritize endorsing, where particularly talking about this broader electoral opportunities piece, where we can build momentum at the bottom of the ticket to decrease roll off, and we can talk about what that means. But in naturally higher turnout elections, right, where there are strategic higher ticket democratic opportunities. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Next slide. So that's the general approach. And we've had a lot of success with this strategy since way back in 2017, our first cycle. And so, I think Rita and Lala covered this really well. This is just a quick slide of some of the incredible achievements that our candidates have made at the chamber level. So flipped the Washington Senate blue in 17, held on to the Delaware Senate, brought Virginia just within a hair of flipping blue in the lower chamber in 17. In 18, flipped the Colorado and Maine Senates, held on to a number of Senates, and broke Republican supermajorities in incredibly important places. 2019, of course, flipping both of those Virginia chambers and delivering that beautiful blue trifecta. And 2020, importantly, our candidates, we're the only flips in a number of state legislative chambers. And in terms of 2020, that's not the focus of this discussion, but I did want to provide a few resources that are related to the state legislative outcomes last November that we produced. And so here's one, which is an early analysis that we put out based on the data as it was coming in. Mallory and I also published an op-ed that I just posted that looks at the impact of gerrymandering, ballot roll-off and ticket splitting, and Democratic and Republican enthusiasm gaps or awareness gaps. So that's an important piece. And then finally, I did a debrief with a great friend of the organization, North Carolina Representative Greg Mayer, a few weeks ago, which is recorded here. And so if you're interested in some 2020 analysis, I would encourage you to check out those resources. And the final thing I would just mention about 2020, I think it's important to remember a few things. First, we didn't hit the goalposts that we had set out. That is true. However, there were great wins at the district level all over the country, including a number of historic wins, which we should all celebrate and remember. And second, while we don't yet have the voter file, so I think we all need to be cautious about, trying to understand what happened or why it happened. Our early analysis, which you can read in our op-ed, shows really strong evidence of an awareness gap on the Democratic side between the top and the bottom of the ticket, which really underscores that, again, we need to think of this mission on a longer timeline. We still have a lot of work to do educating folks about the importance of down ballot races. And so I think it really underscores how important this work is and that civic education work, and gives us a little bit of a roadmap for what to think about the future and where to go. So, so that's just a moment about 2020. Next slide. So let's take a look at this year and next year in terms of what the map looks like. So this is just a graphic representation that's also up on our website of the states that are currently on our map. Next slide. So 2021, for those of you who have been with us for a while, you know that most states don't hold their state legislative elections in odd years. In fact, this year, only Virginia and New Jersey are holding their elections. I sometimes get questions, what about Mississippi and Louisiana, where we were in 2019? Are we going back there? They have 4-year terms for their legislatures. So they're not up this year. They're not going to be up for another 2 years. So this year, we're really looking at Virginia, where the goal is to protect and expand the Democratic trifecta. We're also looking at for special elections that are in strategically valuable states. And we are also looking at the opportunity for our teams to raise some funds this year for our candidates next year in states where the contribution limits would allow that. So, so that is the state funds option as well. Next slide. So let's talk about Virginia for a moment. First of all, I hope you'll come to a panel discussion tomorrow afternoon about Virginia that I'm moderating. We have Tram Nguyen from New Virginia Majority, Andrew Whalen from Emily's List, our very own delegate Joshua Cole, and Jamie Reimers from the Democratic House Caucus. And so we're going to have a panel discussion about Virginia in much more detail about the landscape, what the sort of situation is on the ground and all the rest. But the basic contours of the situation are here. The bottom line is that the census data has been delayed. And what that means is that the new commission in Virginia can't draw new maps because they don't yet have the data. And so what that means is that our folks in Virginia, very, very likely, I can't say it's 100% certain because that decision hasn't been made, but it's extremely, extremely likely that folks will be running on the current maps this year in Virginia. What that also means is that it's possible that next year there may also be state legislative elections in Virginia on the new maps. And then we're also back in 2023 to the usual cycle of running in the odd years. So it's possible, I don't know yet, that we may be looking at elections in Virginia for the next few years, this year and the following 2 years. It's possible that may change as well. But for this year, the bottom line is that very, very likely to be running on the new maps. And so given that, And you'll hear from Jamie tomorrow when we talk about the goal for the Democratic Party this year. What are the goals for the party and the caucus? It's really to protect our majority. And the exact number of seats that we will endorse depends on a few factors, right? It'll depend on who steps up to run. It'll just depend on how, what our volunteer capacity is. And it'll depend on the reasonable needs on the ground, right? How many seats are actually in danger? How many seats are really in a position to flip, particularly since we may need to revisit when there are new maps next year. We're already on the ground working with our friends and our allies on, at the local level and at the national level. We're already chatting with candidates and seeing how the field is shaping up, and already talking to electeds and other stakeholders on the ground in Virginia to understand, what the landscape really is and what the needs are this year. In terms of our endorsements here at Sister District, assuming, as I think we should assume at this point, that we're running on the current maps, we would be looking for our first wave of endorsements after the candidate filing deadline, which is in March. So we're looking at early April for that wave one. And of course, those would be incumbents who are not facing primary challenges, as well as any candidates in flip chambers that are also not facing primaries. For folks in primaries, we would have to wait until mid-June after the primary to endorse a second wave. Next slide. So what about 2022? What I can do is give a brief overview of our target states in terms of where they fit in the 3 types of chambers that we target, as we discussed earlier, and then talk a little bit about nested electoral opportunities that we see and that we're going to be looking to prioritize. I do want to mention incumbent protection and discuss the role of it in 2022 and sort of prep us for playing some defense, as well as talk about the places where we can go on offense, particularly in places where there are redistricting processes that can give us that opportunity to go on offense. Next slide. So in terms of 2022, in terms of the map, this is the general landscape for the chambers that we are most likely to be working in next year. As I mentioned earlier, this is not, of course, set in stone. Things will change on the ground and circumstances will change, but we have a general sense of what things look like. And a lot of these I'm sure, will be very similar and familiar to you because they are states that you all have been working to build power in for quite a while. The Arizona House and Senate, still very close to flipping each of those chambers. The Minnesota Senate is actually up again in 2022, although those are typically four-year terms. In Minnesota, they have a 2-4-4 system where the first where the last term for the decade is 2 years, and then the first 2 terms of the next decade are 4 years. So that adds up to 10 years. That's how they manage their electoral process. And then Michigan, great opportunities. We'll talk about that in a moment, both in the House and the Senate. And New Hampshire, kind of an interesting situation in New Hampshire, slipped into a Republican trifecta last year. And so, but still close to being able to flip both the Senate and the House back blue. In terms of holds, Colorado, where we supported candidates in 2018, very fragile majority there, something we need to watch, as well as Nevada, fragile 2-seat majority in their Senate. Need to watch that and make sure that we hold on there. In terms of inroads, these are the states that I think are still in that category. We laid down some really incredible markers in a lot of these states in 2020, and those are going to pay dividends for us down the road. Again, they're blue inroad states for a reason, right? We know that it's going to take a little bit of time to get there, but we have to start building. And in several of these states, Democrats did pick up seats in 2020, including in the Wisconsin Assembly and the North Carolina Senate, and in other spots. So that's the general landscape. As I mentioned, there are, I think, some states that are not currently on the list that I think could get there, depending on how things shape up on the ground. And the one I would flag is Ohio, particularly because of other electoral opportunities there, and we'll talk about that in a second. But this is the general target list as it looks now. Next slide. So nested opportunities. As I mentioned, we want to maximize opportunities to build momentum at the bottom of the ticket, right, at our level of the ballot, to decrease roll-off, meaning to encourage folks to vote all the way up and down the ballot in those sorts of naturally higher turnout environments where there are Democrats on the ticket in strategic locations on the ballot, up ballot, right? Higher ticket Democratic opportunities. In other words, places where our work can force multiply up and down the ballot for other races that are of strategic value to us. And so in 2022, that's really going to include Senate seats and gubernatorials. It'll also include an analysis of what House seats are in play, but it's a little early to tell right now. We'll be on the lookout for that as things go along. But in general, what we're looking at in the Senate, there are a number of open Senate opportunities, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Ohio, which is why Ohio is kind of on my watch list, that really provide an opportunity for a flip blue, as well as Wisconsin. Not quite clear yet if Wisconsin might actually be an open seat, but certainly a good flip opportunity for Democrats. There are also a few holds in the Senate that we really need to pay attention to, and where we want to invest our energy, make sure we hold on. Cortez Masto in Nevada, North Carolina, in New Hampshire, and Arizona, going back to that, back to Arizona there. On the gubernatorial side, there's also a few, I think, flip opportunities, places where there's going to be a lot of Democratic enthusiasm, and we want to be there. We want to help. Arizona is going to have an open gubernatorial. Florida, Georgia, maybe Stacey will run. Wouldn't that be incredible? Texas, as well as holds, places where Democrats have the governor's mansion now, but we really, really have to hold on because we're in a split government situation. So Pennsylvania, which will be an open gubernatorial, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, these are all states where there's divided government, and having a Democrat in the governor's mansion is a tremendous asset. It's a game-changing situation. We really, really need to hold on to those gubernatorial seats. So those are some of the nested opportunities that we're going to be looking at, and using, again, our firepower down ballot to in these sorts of environments to ensure that we are force multiplying all of your energy and your work up and down the ballot in critically strategic places. Next slide. Oops, there we go. So I think it's important for us to recognize that we are going to have to be prepared to go on defense in 2022. I think there's a few factors that indicate that 2022 might be a tough year for Democrats down ballot, and we should start preparing ourselves now for that. The first is just the general landscape. Midterm elections are typically very hard for the president's party. That's not universally the case, but it's typically true that the president's party tends to lose seats in the House and so forth, and so that's coming up in 2022. Secondly, I think we need to expect that in some states where the Republicans control the redistricting process, we're likely to need to play some defense so that we don't lose our hard-won seats when those new maps come out. So while we didn't hit the goalpost in 2020 in terms of flipping chambers, I think it's really important for us to all recognize and understand that 2021 is not 2011 from a redistricting standpoint for a number of reasons, including the fact that a number of states have commissions now and other processes that should allow maps to be fairer and create some opportunities. And we'll talk for Democrats, and we'll talk about that more on the next slide. But the bottom line from a redistricting standpoint is that it's a mixed bag. It's not all good and it's not all bad. We're going to be on defense in some states and we're going to be on offense in other states. And so in terms of incumbent protection, what this means is, while we've always endorsed some fragile incumbents here at Sister District, we're likely going to need to keep that as a significant part of the strategy next year, because we can't lose the gains that we've made, and it's going to need to be, we're going to need to be prepared to play some defense. Next slide. But as I said, there are also opportunities to go on offense due to redistricting processes. So it's not all good and it's not all bad. It's really a mixed bag. And what we need to do is find the opportunities and take advantage of all of them. And so, you know, there are some states that I think we can go on offense or continue to go on offense. And so in Arizona, you know, there is an independent commission. Excuse me. It has been, you know, it's been in place for a little while. One set of data that I think is quite interesting about Arizona is when we ran our post-2020 election analysis after the election last year, and we looked at the impact of gerrymandering on the outcomes that we saw. What we saw is that in Arizona, there's little evidence of gerrymandering. It's not particularly gerrymandered, which is a good start under that independent commission. And now we get another chance for a new set of maps. My understanding is that the person who's going to be chairing the independent commission in Arizona is you know, a fair and balanced person. This is good news. There was an effort to have a less fair and balanced person, but that didn't turn out to be the case, which is good news for us. Colorado has a new independent redistricting process. Pennsylvania, I think, is an interesting case. In 2011, the Republicans controlled the legislature, the governor's mansion, and a majority on the Supreme Court. Not the case this year. Much better situation. Governor Wolf can veto the congressional maps, but even more, that's Democratic Governor Wolf, but even more than that, really, really importantly, Democrats have a 5-2 majority on the state Supreme Court. And in terms of drawing the lines, it's done by a commission with the tiebreaker selected by the Supreme Court. So that indicates that the process is likely to be more fair than it was the last time. And in addition, if the maps end up going to court anyways, the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania has already shown that it's willing to throw out bad maps. It did that in 2018. So I think that Pennsylvania provides some interesting opportunities given what things may look like after the new maps. And then finally, Michigan, I think this is the crown jewel for offense opportunities. New independent commission in Michigan with both of those chambers in flip contention, I think is truly the crown jewel for offense next year. In terms of due to redistricting opportunities. Next slide. So great, we have a few minutes. Hopefully this provided you all with a broad look at the 4-pillar strategy, a deeper dive into that first pillar, which is winning elections, and our electoral strategy for this year and for next year. Let's see if we have got, this may actually be a little bit chaotic to try to screen in the moment. So what I will say is my email address is here, and please feel free to reach out to me. Please feel free to DM me. I'll be here as they say, I'll be here all day. And I'm more than happy to chat about the nitty gritty or the high level with you at any time. Please feel free to reach out to me. So thank you so much. I'll turn things back over to Liz.